kind of land. Mhm.
Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Are you coming to the room 2094?
Sorry?
Are you coming to the room 2094? Or are you presenting online?
I'm presenting online.
Okay, so you will share your own presentation.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Good evening, everyone. You are welcome to this session on food system diversification for food and nutrition security. My name is Imano Donko, and I'm a project manager for Healthy Diets for Africa, which is an EU project based in Justus Liebig University in Gießen. So with this session, we have 5 presentations touching on different food systems. So we have irrigated farming system in Kenya, we have tree crop farming system, we have mushroom production, fortified crop species, and also livelihood strategies. So without wasting much time, I would like to invite just a second. I'd like to invite the first presenter. Okay, before that, for better discussion and due to time factor, this is how I want us to organize the presentation. I want all the presenters to do their presentation, and then afterwards, we have a general discussion. I think this will help us to maximize the limited time that we have. So beginning with Nexion Maruti Kiratu, presenting on pathways to nutritional outcomes for different irrigation arrangements. That is evidence from smallholder farmers in rural Kenya. So you have 10 minutes, so just be quick. And I will encourage the presenters not to spend too much on the methodology. All right, so the floor is yours.
Yes, so welcome to the presentation. I'm going to present on the pathways to nutritional outcomes for different irrigation arrangements, taking an evidence from rural Kenya. So I think the start of the conference has given a very good basis on what's happening in the world. And as you can see, while the caloric supply in the world has been going up in all the continents, actually. But on the other hand, the food security situation is different. Food insecurity is actually increasing while there's a lot of production coming up. And this is a problem that is also prevalent in Kenya. While Kenya has been doing well as compared to its peers in East Africa, but from 2018, 2019, it has been experiencing the worst drought. And so it has seen its food insecurity rise to levels that were actually higher than what were achieved in the MDGs. And in this sense, Kenya is quite arid and semi-arid, with about almost 90% of its land being in these ASAL areas. And while this is so, much of the irrigation usually happens in the less drier places, as you can see in the white places. And that's where actually our sampling came from, as you will see. However, Kenya has quite a good potential when it comes to irrigation, with around 1.434 million hectares viable for irrigation, and only 16% actually has been utilized of this potential. And the irrigation arrangements that are usually common is the private, the public, and the farmer-led. What am I saying about the public-led? The public irrigation scheme, they are established by the government, but usually managed between the government agency and the farmer or farm organizations. So these are expansive, and they really are publicly funded, or so, especially in infrastructure such as irrigation schemes, as you can see there. The other one is the farmer-led irrigation arrangements. This is where farmers drive the establishment and the improvement and expansion of agriculture, irrigated agriculture. And so the use of the technology they use from rudimentary technology, such as watering cans, to pumps, solar pumps, and such as this. And these are the two irrigation arrangements that we took to understand or to study about. And our claim is that while in much of literature, irrigation is taken as unidirectional, but for us, we claim that irrigation is actually segmented. And while we try to cover up much of this in other names like smallholder irrigation and all that, and it's not that I'm criticizing the literature, but in actual sense, most of the analysis that is available in literature is unidirectional. But this irrigation is not usually unidirectional. And the irrigation arrangements are actually influenced by factors in the household, where the choice is dependent on the resources of the household. And such, we claim that the different irrigation arrangements affect not only the impact pathways to nutrition, but the nutritional outcomes in actual sense. And specifically, especially the farmer-led irrigation arrangements that has been seen as not rational, but in actual sense, it does impact nutrition through the farm income pathway and production pathway. So these are the three pathways that we took to undertake, where the production pathways leads to quantity and frequency of food available by cushioning the farm household against the seasonal production. Income pathway leads to high expenditure and women empowerment by empowering more women, things like production decisions, assets, and resources to women. Then it can lead to food, farm household, and nutrition security. However, this is dependent upon the household, and that's what we want to know. So how do these three lead to food security? So in our methodology, we took 384 sample size of 384 farmers comprising of non-irrigators, irrigators in the two arrangements. And we compared them using statistical method, which we applied an analytical procedure of three-stage least square regression, where we used the minimum dietary diversity for women, which is a more stricter measurement of nutrition, to check whether the household is nutritionally secure. Because the MDD, the minimum dietary diversity for women, checks on nutritional or nutrients intake rather than the household dietary diversity that takes into access of nutrition. So that's our specification of the model. I will not go into details. What we found out is when we can take that irrigation is aggregated, we found that women empowerment and farm income does actually influence nutrition. But going on to the farmer-led arrangements and the public arrangement, this is what we found in a snapshot. That while in aggregated, we see that the pathways, irrigation does actually influence production diversity, farm income, and women empowerment positively. It is only a viable way to minimum dietary diversity through women empowerment and farm income. But when it comes to the farmer-led irrigation arrangements, while farm income and women empowerment are viable, on the other hand, public, it's only for women empowerment pathway. So women empowerment then comes out as a neglected way that has not been studied for long on how it impacts on the nutritional status of the household. And such ways as these overlooked points, as this woman whom you can't see there, while in the fringes is having pumpkin, kale, and amaranth being farmed, but it cannot be seen at the farm household questionnaire level if you go to one person. Or places like here where you see arrowroots by the fringe of the canal, or women having less workload because the water is available to them, or the sweet potatoes in a cropping of bananas, or a chicken coop besides the cattle herd, or a farmer organization that is led by women only in actual sense, or even women entrepreneurs in this sense. So in conclusion, the 3 points is that irrigation is not unilateral in nature, and it impacts differently depending on the arrangements that the farmers are in. Then sometimes logical gains are not necessarily gainful. For instance, the gains of specialization, where they only crop one crop, it doesn't lead to nutrition. And sometimes increase in income does not necessarily lead to nutritional security. And then women empowerment is a key irrigation nutrition pathway that has been overlooked. And so there is need to have specific policies that are based on the different irrigation arrangements, and also to have more of nutrition education and behavioral change, and then looking at markets, because income pathway can only lead to nutrition outcome through markets. And then women empowerment, the need to look beyond the income at household decision making, homegrown technologies such as fringe lands, livestock keeping such as small livestock, and village exchange markets. They are very critical to this way. That's the funders, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for trying to be at this moment. Okay, at this moment, I will invite Martha Asante to present from Food System Contribution for Sustainable Food and Nutrition Security for All, what place for smallholder tree crop farming. So Martha, you have 10 minutes. So I will encourage you as they present. If you have any questions, please jot them down. Once they are done with the presentation, I will give you opportunity for you to ask them.
Good afternoon. My name is Martha, and this afternoon, with permission from my co-authors, we'll be speaking to you on what place for tree crop farming in our debate about equitable food systems and ensuring food security for all. So development policies or strategies, especially for the global south, Ghana included, often encourage farmers' integration into global value chains. Particularly in Ghana, in our policies, you find tree crops like cocoa, oil palm, cashew, and others. And this is so because we assume that this will increase farmers' income, and that would also ensure or increase household food and nutrition security. But in this presentation, we are going to show you that this is not the case, especially for oil palm and cocoa farmers in Ghana. And the reason being that not all the smallholder farmers we encourage to enter into tree crop production are the same. Also, tree crop farming affects land for food crop production. Also, high income that we assume they will get is not guaranteed. And lastly, even if higher incomes are guaranteed, there's no assurance that it's going to be spent on food. And so the question we asked was, how does smallholder farm household engagement in the three crop value chain affect their household food and nutrition security? And we actually used survey, interviews, and focus group discussions with 168 farmers across 3 regions in Ghana, using 18 communities. In our results, we found that at least we have 4 different types of smallholder farmers. The first being the landless, and these are usually called laborers, but in their own right are also farmers. These include sharecroppers and caretakers. And the second one is the single tree crop household. Mostly in our study, we found in our data, they were cocoa farmers, farmers who own their own cocoa farms. And then we have the multiple tree crop household. These owned oil palm and cocoa farm, mostly some in different regions of Ghana, and others also had cashew, mango, and others. And the final one is the absentee household, who we assume employ these landless households. In terms of food security, we realize that the seasonal food insecurity is every year in Ghana, and is particularly severe in June, July, just before the tree crop incomes and when they harvest their own food crops. So among the landless, we found there were 18% of our sample, and mostly these were young men, most of them migrants who are come from northern Ghana, another part of Ghana, into the tree crop value chains. They have no lands of their own. They work for other landowners in the tree crop system. But we find that through other arrangement for food co-production, they are able to produce their own food, but they have low income because, for instance, sharecroppers often have no income until the tree crops mature. Caretakers, on the other hand, get 1/3 of the yield from the tree crop, for instance. And so we realize that only small percentage of these farmers are able to buy food from food markets, and that's about 30% of them. The 70% cannot afford to buy food from food markets. Again, we find in terms of food security that 70% of them face food insecurity, and 20% of them are in a severe cases. The single tree crop household was 29% of the sample, and these were relatively older farmers. Their farms are old and they cannot intercrop with food crops. Their incomes are low, despite the fact that they get all the income from the tree crops. Only 44% of them had access to food markets and they could buy food from food markets. And so about 56% could not buy food. 67% of them experienced food insecurity, and interestingly, 31% were in the severe, where we assume that they will have higher incomes than the landless. The multiple tree crop households stood out as the better off a bit. They were the majority in our samples, and usually they have both cocoa and oil palm, and others also had other tree crops. These were older men relative to the other groups, and they had other jobs aside from tree crop farming, like processing their own oil palm, for instance. Their incomes were a bit higher, and so we realized that the higher income is actually coming from non-farm activity and not from the farm. 66% of these could access food markets, obviously because of their higher incomes, but still about nearly half experience mild to severe food insecurity. The only difference between them and the other group being that 8% were in the severe. The last group is the absentee household. They were consisted of 16% of the sample. These were very old farmers, and we had a large number of female farmers in these groups. 89% managed to produce their own food because they give the tree crop farm to someone and they move to a city or a different town to do other activities, which also include food crop production. 51% of these were able to access food markets because they have the highest incomes, and their income is coming from the other non-farm activity, like owning a provision store or having learned a skill like hairdressing or something that they use to get this money, because they lose 1/3 of their cocoa incomes to the landless who manage the farms for them. And we realize that 54% of these face mild to severe food insecurity, 19% being in the severe. And so it can be concluded that putting farmers in the global value chains, like a tree crop value chain, affect them differently. Also, seasonal food insecurity prevails and it affects them differently. Those who are able to combine their own production with certain higher amount of income are the ones who are able to survive and remain food secure. There's also a question of autonomy, and this here, autonomy is having the choice with your farm to do what you want with your farm. And we realize that oil palm farmers do not have that choice. Often when they put them in our grower scheme where they are in bondage for 25 years with other actors in the value chain, and that compromises their household food and nutrition security. We also realize that intercropping tree crops and food crops is the only way to go, as food crop lands are being put under tree crop production. And so we recommend, it appears, that to actually meet food security needs of tree crop farmers, we need to introduce them to non-farm activities, for instance, like gari production, processing your own oil palm, and other activities. There's also the need to promote diversified farming system, such as intercropping cocoa and oil palm with food crops so that the household is maintained. Thank you very much for your attention.
Martha, thank you very much for the concise presentation. So at this moment, I would like to invite Daniel Grimm to present on the potential of mushroom production for food security and farmers' income in Uganda.
It's the two of us. But we can share this. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Happy to be able to present to you. My name is Enno Sonntag, and I will be presenting a shared presentation with my colleague Daniel Grimm on the potential of maize crop residues for oyster mushroom production in Uganda. I don't need to go into the details of the challenges we're facing. They were addressed in length this morning. For sub-Saharan Africa, population growth and scarce land means that by the year 2100, there could be as little as 500 square meters of farmland per person. So the question is, on this little land, how can we produce more food without using more resources, because they're just not available? And the system we came up with is the landless food system. The idea is that in addition to conventional crop production, we use the crop residues for mushroom production. And then after mushroom production, we use the spent mushroom substrate to rear earthworms. So we generate 2 additional protein sources, and then the compost can be returned to the field. But we wanted to assess this system. So we chose Uganda for our case study. And you can see the reason why we chose Uganda on this image. The population growth is quite high, 3.2% per year. And already today, there's less than 0.15 hectares per person. So these really marginal lands are already being taken into cultivation. And yeah, here it gives you an idea of what the challenge is there. The studies are, yeah, and you can see in the study region, crop residues are being burned after harvest. So that's a typical management method. They're also being fed to cattle in some cases, but that's not productive. So our study site is in Kibale district, Uganda, in the central region, where you have 2 maize harvests per year. The reason is that this is one of the highly maize producing areas of the country. And we also knew a farmer in this region, which allowed us access to the study site. Yeah, you can see that we sampled 4 fields. 3 in each season, the one being August 22 last year and one being January this year. In each field, so we did a transect through the area to select the fields visually, looking like medium, low, and high yield. And in each field, we then took 3 samples across a diagonal. In a 25 square meter circle, we counted the number of plants present. We then randomly sampled 20 of these plants and separated the grains from the crop residues and weighed both. We also did farmer interviews in order to understand what are the reasons for the differences between the fields that we observed. The results are shown here. You don't need to look at all the figures. The main figure is this one down here. So across the 2 seasons, this is the annual mean of crop residues produced per hectare. So that's 4,600 roughly, or 700. Then assuming that, or in Uganda, 1.18 million hectares are under maize cultivation, although not all of this is farmed or harvested twice a year, as I mentioned earlier. So depending on the area that you assume having 2 harvests, we would get from this number, from this figure, if we calculated for the whole country, we would get a total of 3.5 to 5.5 million tons of maize crop residues for the country, which are potentially usable for mushroom production.
So I'll take over from here. Thanks. So yeah, that's what we did. We produced mushrooms on the maize that we took from Uganda to Germany, and we did it in the way you see on the right. I won't go into the details, but we were able to turn around 12.6% of the dry matter of the residues into edible mushrooms, which is quite a lot. And 44.2% was spent mushroom substrate, which could be used for worm production. So we would have even more protein there. The rest is CO2. If we synthesize the data of the field work and the mushroom production, we have these results. First of all, if you look at the box plot on the right, you see that the first season was less productive than the second season in terms of mushroom yield per hectare. So we had less crop residues in the first season, so we produced less mushrooms. But in total, per year, we would produce around 590 kilograms of dried oyster mushrooms per hectare. And in terms of fresh oyster mushrooms, since mushrooms are 90% water, we would produce around 6.5 tons of mushrooms. So that would be more fresh mushrooms than fresh corn. And if we look at the dry yield, which I think is more significant, more relevant, we would have 14% of the corn yield we would also have in mushrooms. So basically 14% of the amount of corn we would have as mushroom. Now, mushrooms are very different from a nutritional point of view than maize. Maize is a staple crop. It has a lot of calories and very little protein. Mushrooms have very few calories, but a lot of protein, vitamins, and so on. I could hold a whole talk about this, but let's just focus on the protein. So this is data from the FAO and the United Nations. In blue, you see the population growth, and in green, especially first focus on the dark green line, that's the protein consumption in Uganda per capita, so per person per day. And you see it has been going down in the last 10 years, steadily going down, mostly because of the population growth. And I calculated how much we would have if we used all of the crop residues, all of the maize residues in Uganda for mushroom production. And that would be 7 grams of protein per person per day extra. So that's a significant contribution, and that would be the bright yellow, bright green line that you see there. However, if we were to implement mushroom cultivation in Uganda and use all of the maize crop residues, that would bring severe challenges and also potential environmental damage, because as you see on the left here, the way that mushrooms are produced right now, it uses a lot of firewood. The substrate has to be sterilized or pasteurized. So the way it's almost always done, as we found out in farmer interviews, it uses a lot of firewood. So if we used all of the maize crop residues for mushroom production, we would basically have no more forests left. Also, we would need technology like mills to chop all of the straw and so on, because currently they are using cotton seed husks, which are, they can just get it from the cotton producers and it's already a perfect substrate. The maize crops, the residues you would have to chop. So there would need to be a development progress to really utilize this material and use this potential. Yes. So I hope we can discuss more about this later. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
We are just within the time. Thank you so much for being concise and short. I would like to invite Gary Daguma, presenting on impacts of social capital and rural households' livelihood strategies on food and nutrition security and income. So he's online, right? Okay.
Gary, you can share your screen.
Is that visible now? Hello?
We can hear you, we cannot see you, and we can't see your screen.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Oh,
All right. So if you are facing technical challenges, then I'd like to, okay.
can I proceed with presentation? I think there is a technical difficulties, but I can hear you and following you, but I couldn't share the things to you. So I can present, but it is difficult to share because there are difficulties in internet connection, I think.
Okay, then what I would suggest is probably you can send your PowerPoint to us and then we move to it.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so just a second. That is stop origin. Richard, can you try to?
Yes, I can try to share mine. Can you hear me?
Gary, do you have any issue? You raised your hand.
Oh, no.
Okay.
So,
Richard,
okay.
please
Yes.
go ahead. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I think you can see my screen. I can also see. Okay, thank you very much for let's just do this. Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are, in Berlin or online. My name is Richard, and I'm going to present on impacts of biofortified bean adoption on productivity, income, and nutritional outcomes. And this is a case of Zimbabwe. And I'm presenting on, and my colleague Bo is also part of this work. So my presentation will run from introduction. I'll talk briefly about the methodology, and mostly I'll spend my time in discussing the results, and I'll have some conclusions. In terms of introduction, production and consumption of biofortified crops increases the micronutrient intake especially in the studies which have been done in children and women of reproductive age, have shown that when they consume iron beans, the iron intake increases in their blood. And studies have shown that adoption of biofortified crops is very important to increase the yield and the consumption and the income of the households. However, these studies have not looked at incorporated the complementarity issues of irrigation and also the aspects of intercrop, especially for households which are land constrained, and the aspects of information about the nutritional value of biofortified crops into the analysis. And therefore, in this study, we try to fill that gap by including aspects about the irrigation of the plot, whether the farmer has done intercrop or whether they have received nutritional information and how that helps them to adopt a biofortified iron bean and see how that has an impact on the yield and the income of the households. So we have used the nationally representative survey in Zimbabwe. This survey was conducted to assess the adoption of the iron beans in Zimbabwe. And the sampling strategy was in 3 stages. In the first stage, 85 wards were selected. And in those wards, a total of 126 villages were selected. And in total, 1,512 respondents were interviewed in all the provinces that were beans growing. So in terms of the methodology, we have used the instrumental variable model to tease out the effects of adopting iron beans on the outcomes of interest. And we have hypothesized that those that grow iron beans have a higher yield, and therefore that has an impact on the income, agricultural income. And we have used this model because it has the ability to address the challenges of endogeneity and sample selection bias. And we have used 2 instruments, that is access to government support and also access to agro input dealer. So in terms of our results from the adoption survey, we found that from the provinces that have grown iron beans, 28% of the households have grown iron beans in 2022. That's last year. And the highest being in Manicaland, a province in Zimbabwe, and the lowest being in Masona South and Masona West. So in terms of the first stage of the instrumental variable, the 2-stage approach, which gives us, the first stage gives us the determinants of adoption of iron beans. We found that from our hypothesis, a farmer having irrigation and intercrop did not have an effect on adopting iron beans. The effects, the factors that really determine the adoption of iron beans were 1, a farmer being female, and 2, the farmer receiving the nutritive information about the biofortified iron beans, and also the farmer receiving information about the short cooking time of iron beans. But what is so interesting is, which is not to our expectation, is the short cooking time, which has a negative effect on adoption of iron beans. We expected that the cooking time issue, which will help the farmers adopt the iron beans, which we perceive as to have short cooking time. And in terms of the yield, the effect of adoption of iron beans on yield and income, we found that the adoption of iron beans has a positive effect on the yield. That means a farmer having grown iron beans will have 18% higher yields compared to the one that does not have that does not grow iron beans. And therefore, this is because we know that these iron beans are coming from they are bred from improved varieties which have higher yields. So this is not surprising, but that effect does not translate into the income, the agricultural income of the households, which will probably be explained by the fact that in that area, beans is not really grown for income. It's grown majorly for home consumption, and it's a food security crop compared to maize that is grown for income. So in this model, we controlled for land, the household size, and education, and so forth. So in terms of the conclusions, our paper has concluded that irrigation and intercropping is not really having determinant on adoption of iron beans. Also, we have concluded the sex of the household head being a female, the nutritive value of the iron beans, which is very important policy variable to include in the sensitization of these biofortified crops, and the cooking time are very important determinants of iron beans. We also conclude that adoption of iron beans has a positive effect on the yield, but not yet on the agricultural income. Thank you. This is our presentation for this afternoon. Thank you for listening to me.
Gary, are you around? Gary?
Yes, yes.
All right, we received your PowerPoint already, so we're going to share from here.
Let me stop sharing. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so you have 10 minutes to start.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Sorry for some inconveniences. I was planned to participate in person, but due to some technical, I was going to present online. Now I will use my time to present on impact of social capital and rural household livelihood strategies on food, nutrition security, and the income. This research was done in Ethiopia. The presentation outline is introduction, methodology, result and discussion in brief, and the conclusion. As a background, food demand worldwide is always rising, hence increasing smallholder farmers' productivity and production
Gary, since there's can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Hello, Gary, can you hear me? Hello? Gary, can you hear me?
Becoming essential
Can you hear me?
as the most important.
There might be network problem. No, we have the presentation. I think he signed out completely. All right. I think we can start with the question. All right. So we lost Gary. So we want to make good use of the time. So whilst we wait for Gary, I would like the presenters, if you can take the front seat. Now I open the floor for any questions. All right. Any questions for the presenters? Okay.
Thank you very much. I have a question for the first two presenters.
Okay.
Because I felt quite struck by similarities in the outcomes of their research.
Okay.
That both of them were basically stating that in their cases, the increase in income did not directly lead to better nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And also that ways to increase income may it be through irrigation or pushing for global cash crops.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they reduced the production diversity and had actually a negative impact on nutrition in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd just like to hear reflections from the presenters on the similarities between their research and whether they think there is a more generic mechanism at play there that may be, also across different. I mean, they were based in really different food or, let's say, agro systems,
Mm-hmm.
coming out with similar conclusions, and whether they think there is a generic mechanism at play there.
All right. So you want to? Yeah. The mic is there so you can. Maybe you can come here so that those watching us online can see your face. Yeah. And Martha, join me here.
For my case, it depends on the irrigation arrangement. And this actually was the fact for the public irrigators. The public irrigators are usually commercial rice farmers, so they farm rice. But now when it came to the farmer-led irrigation, actually for them, increase in farm income does lead to more nutrition security. But you can get the difference between these two. Most of the farmer-led, they usually crop market demand crops, such as French beans, tomatoes, or even vegetables in this sense. So you can see the difference between these crops in actual sense, because some of them actually can be taken at the household and not even the household, but actually when you take to the market, because it's market demand, then there's an ability for the farmer to have constant, in actual sense, income that they can access market food that is being sold at the market. But for the other ones, especially when it comes to the rice, although it's commercial rice, but in actual sense, we found that while actually irrigation does increase their farm income, it doesn't lead to nutritional transition in this sense, or they do not spend more money on nutritious food in actual sense. So I think for me, it depends with the irrigation arrangements. That's the much difference that there is.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that these results might actually be in other different type of tree crops, also different type of food crops, for instance, in the production of maize as a monoculture. For instance, there's no space for food crop production. and then we assume they will get a bigger income. But at the end of the day, that is not the case. And so if you realize in the cocoa sector now, they are talking about living income, ensuring that farmers have incomes that can sustain their household of certain size throughout the year. And so I think aside irrigation, this can replicate to other agroecological zones and to other crops. In terms of the food crop production, like I said, as you expand any commodity crop, it is likely to affect food crop production, because most of this, to get the expected yield, you cannot combine with other food crops. And that is why perhaps it's in all cases for all global value chain crops like soya bean, for instance, and other crops. Thank you.
I also have a question for you. I'm just wondering, in your research, did you also consider the type of irrigation that was being used by the farmers? You know, I know you have 2 schemes, but I'm talking about a specific type of irrigation, drip irrigation, whatever kind of irrigation. Did you factor that in your analysis?
Yes, it was factored in, especially for the farmer-led, who use a lot of diverse kind of irrigation system. So for us to classify, especially the 2 ones, you not only look at infrastructure, but you also look at the institutional setup, whether they pay things like access to free water, especially for those in public. Then the form of irrigation mechanism at the farm level also. Is it drip irrigation? Is it by funnel, or is it by siphoning? Yes, it was taken actually in consideration, especially when classifying the farmers into which they take place. Yes. Okay, ideally that would have been the case, but also we actually got a challenge because of the sampling sizes, especially because the methodology required quite robust data, because in actual sense what I presented was a system of 15 regressions. So sometimes when you reduce the sizes especially, then comparison becomes almost impossible.
Thank you very much. I had one question, but that has already been answered by you. I was just wondering the possible reasons why farm-led irrigation has no effect on production diversity, but I think you have answered that question. So any more? Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is for the second presenters.
Okay.
On food system transformation for sustainable food and nutrition security for all. On methodology part, you categorize farmers into 4: landless, single, multiple, and again absenteeism. How do you select from all groups? That means how many people are from landless, single, and the others? Again, I need some clarification. To say absenteeism, what is your threshold? To say landless. So this is my clarification question on methodology part. Again, on conclusion part, how do you conclude for all groups the same conclusion? For landless, for multiple, and again for the absenteeism? I suggest that this is better if you give recommendation specifically for all group of categories.
Okay.
Thank you.
Martha, can you briefly touch on this? And then I think Gary is back, so we need to also give him an opportunity to present.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. So if I understood your questions, the first one is how we came up with the 4 groups. And we use both cluster analysis and farmer perspective. So in the first instance, farmers classified differences among themselves. And there we had 6 different groups that farmers think exist among them. And then we ran the cluster analysis from the survey data, and the cluster analysis produced 4 groups. So then now we compared with farmer classification, and then we realized that, for instance, farmers divided caretakers from sharecroppers. So in the farmer classification, those were 2 groups. But in the cluster analysis, it came out as 1 group. And that is because this group are working on land for other landowners. So for instance, caretakers manage already productive cocoa farms or oil palm farms. They didn't make the farm. Sharecroppers, on the other hand, make the farm, and in some cases, the landowner and the sharecropper shares the farm. And so each one keeps their own part of the land. But in other cases, in other part of Ghana, they only share the produce at the end of every season. And so that's how we came up with this group. And perhaps one thing to note about cluster analysis is that it usually compromises between the number of classes you want and the uniqueness of each cluster. So sometimes at the end of the day, the decision on how many clusters to keep is left with the researcher. So you actually try to find how unique each cluster that it produces, and if that uniqueness fits the context of that study. On the other question, the conclusion is not actually the same for all groups. If you realize the single tree crop farmers, for instance, were the worst off. But this is a group where they own their farm, they get all the income from the farm. And so without these research, we expected that they would be better off than the landless, because the landless actually get 1/3 of the income from the farm that they manage. But the difference here being that the landless are able to produce food through sharecropping arrangements or keep and share in terms of rearing livestock, for instance. Whilst the single tree crop household, their farms are matured, they are older people, they cannot work for other farmers again, and so their income is not enough as expected, and they cannot also, in these cases, produce their own food. So the outcome varies for all these 4 groups. Thank you.
So I have a question for you, Daniel and Co. I'm just wondering, with your some mushroom production for security, I'm just wondering if in your analysis you considered marketing of mushroom, and also I'm also wondering if you have any idea what category of consumers do eat mushroom.
Thanks for the question. We did consider that. So one of the problems in marketing is mushrooms have a short shelf life. In the heat of Uganda without a cooling chain. You can't dry them, then they stay, and you can keep them. But otherwise it's around 3 days. And that's it. So most of the mushroom production takes place in Kampala and around Kampala, and some of the other bigger cities like Jinja. And in rural areas where most of the production potential is, you don't really have all that much production, because you lack the markets at the moment. And the people who eat them, it depends very much on the price, which fluctuates a lot. So the problem is that the cottonseed husks have become a lot more expensive. And that has driven up the prices. And that's also one of the reasons why it would be so good to have other substrates such as maize residues, because that would bring down the prices. The problem is it needs initial investment for buying the machinery. Right now, the price of mushrooms is about 10 times as much as the price of beans, of the same amount of beans. So people who are hungry, they rather go for the beans than the mushrooms. So it's more a luxury crop.
Yeah. Okay.
Just if I may add to the second part of your question, who are the consumers? Maybe also who are the producers? It's mainly females in the peri-urban area who don't have land. So instead of, you know, the kitchen garden, the chicken coop, it's females earning an extra income for the family. And the consumers can be actually quite a lot of the mushrooms are sold within the neighborhood, achieving much higher prices than on the market. And then, the second option is taking the mushrooms to the market, but then you need transport, you need the middleman. So you make a less income if you take the mushrooms, the fresh mushrooms to the market, actually. But so that means it's really anyone eating mushrooms.
All right, Michael. And then
also a question about the mushroom study.
Richard, I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Yeah. The first one is just a technical. I was just curious. You presented per hectare yields, and I was wondering, how do you calculate? Is that the amount of how much mushroom would the amount of straw harvested from 1 hectare of maize field produce? Is that your calculation? Okay. And the second one, if I may add, is just with crop residues. There's always so many things you could do. The worst is probably to burn them, but you could incorporate them into the soil, animal feed, bioenergy, mushroom production. So based on your experiences, I mean, you also mentioned some problems. If you conclude your study, would you recommend people to use the residues for mushroom production?
Thank you. Those are really good questions. So the yields per hectare, it's not the area you need for mushroom production, it's the area of maize production. So it's just if I have 12.6% of the biomass of residues turned into mushroom, then I can calculate how much that means per hectare. That's basically just that number. And concerning the second question, I'm sure you'll have something to add. We specifically chose substrates that are so bad in their nutrient content that they cannot be used as animal feed, because there's plenty of goats and cows roaming around to take care of the more greener and nutritious crops. So we used standing dead maize, which I would say they can be mulched into the earth. That would be good for soil nutrition, but the way we want to do it is produce food and then produce soil. So I would say it's the best way. It just needs more efficient technology, especially for the pasteurization, using solar energy rather than firewood. Anything to add?
Okay. So after this, Richard, I'll come back to you.
Okay, yeah. Finally, thank you for giving me the floor. I have a few questions. Question for the first presenter. You concluded that irrigation is not unilateral, so I would like you to give clarification. What do you mean by irrigation not being unilateral? And also, Martha concluded that suggested intercropping as one of the ways to increase nutrition status. I'm wondering, what's the status right now? Isn't intercropping happening? And if not, what is preventing farmers from adopting such a practice? And if I may contribute to your question, it depends on what they use for the additional income. For example, in the case of where I come from, when there's additional income from farming, it's either paying school fees for the children, it's either buying clothes, or buying a mobile phone. So that might not contribute to the nutrition status of things. And now for the mushroom research, I got quite interested in that because I'm also doing almost a similar thing in a neighbor of Uganda. So I'm doing that in Rwanda. But obviously I started quite later than you guys. So you are more experienced in that. So I saw you taking samples on the field. I would like to know what were those samples aiming at, and what were you specifically measuring in that maize? You also said that you could produce 500 kilograms of dry matter, dry oyster mushroom, but I somehow missed or I didn't pay attention how much maize residue did you use as substrate to create the substrate, yeah. You also raised a quite important challenge of biofuels burning for sterilization of the mushroom tubes, which is also happening in Rwanda. So are you suggesting that the technique is not sustainable, so they should give up mushroom production? Or what do you think is the most appropriate way going forward, looking at the circumstances? Also, I want to know, like, so you brought the mushroom, how much did you brought the substrate, the maize from Uganda to Kenya, I mean to Germany. So how much did you transport from Uganda to Germany? Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, yeah. I would appreciate if you can be
Close to the
very
mic.
brief,
Okay.
so that I just want to give Gary just 5 minutes to tell us something, so
Okay.
that he's not
Sure.
left behind. Yeah.
Okay, I will try to be very quick. All right, so first, yes, how much did we take? We sampled those 20 stems per sampling point. We took all of that back to Germany. About 60 kilos of straw and cobs and so on. So that's the amount, and then we took representative samples of those samples and calculated the total number from that. Regarding the point of sustainability, well, what we wanted to point out is that there's always trade-offs, right? If you decide to go one pathway and develop, for example, this mushroom production sector for women, then you need certain technology, you need the shredding material, you need to have a more efficient way of sterilizing, not using wood, because otherwise you have the deforestation problem. So there's just these kind of challenges that you need to consider when scaling up certain technologies. And also, you added the question, like, with women empowerment, because it's marginalized women growing these mushrooms. Yes, that may be a pathway, but if you produce mushrooms, it's only feasible at a certain scale. You need a certain amount of technology, you need a certain level of knowledge, and that will be easier on a larger scale. So at some point, what happened in China, for example, is that these small producers are being pushed out of the market by large-scale professional growers. So yeah, it's a complex question to answer. And yeah, that's just what we wanted to show, that one has to be careful in considering these different aspects.
I think due to time, please, I think maybe you can have discussion after the presentation or after the program, and let's be kind to Gary so that he can at least also tell us something. Richard, I'll come back to you, okay? You are not left out. Gary, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, for time's sake, sorry for
sorry
this.
for the.
Could you just touch on the key results and just give us some conclusions, and then we have some questions probably for you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Really, I just the conclusion, because here, as I already mentioned, the methodology we used is a sample of 400 households were interviewed from North Shawa zone, central of Oromia region of Ethiopia. We used descriptive statistics as well as multinomial indigenous switching regression.
I think the internet is still a big problem.
Model analysis, of course, activities. A measurement of social capital is the level of participation in social local organizations. And the second one is a level of trust. I don't go detail in how these variables were measured because due to time.
Gary, we are finding it difficult to hear you. I don't know. I think because of the connection, unfortunately, we need to. Hello.
Quickly go to the revealed that household food sector. Hello.
Yeah, please, can you quickly just go to the conclusion probably and just tell us one or two things because we hardly hear you from here. The network is very bad.
Okay, the conclusion from the result shows that how high level of trust in the compared to household is low and the medium level of trust. Also, household is high level of social trust in the community have high and the medium level of trust with respect to household livelihood strategies. There is an impact of livelihood strategies. Participation in farming with off farming and farming with both non-farming and off farming livelihood diversification strategies and 82% respectively was statistically significant. Of course, it is evidence that when households participate in more than one livelihood activities besides farming, the household have a chance to have more appropriate opportunities to gain additional income with which otherwise limited to only farming. Of course, with respect to impact of participation in local organization on income, the estimated result indicates that medium level of participation in local social organization of the farm household did not significantly increase farm household total income over that of low-level participant households. However, high and very high level of participation in local social organization of the sample households increased the farm households total income by 46 and 55% respectively over the low level of participated households. So the estimated result indicates that high and very high level of participation social local organization sample household increase the farm household total income by 46% and 65% respectively. So I just go to the conclusion, of course, due to time. Livelihood diversification strategies in the form of farming combined with both non-farming and off-farming enhances food security status of households in the North Shower zone of Oromia region of Ethiopia. On the other hand, social capital become one of the important factors that become determine the well-being of the community. Higher level of participation in local social organization and having high level of community trust helps in enhancing farm household food security and income generation status. This understanding the level of social trust and the participation in social organization will help to understand where and how to interact in a community to enhance food security and the income of the community. So this research tries to show how the social capital with respect to the cognitive and the structural at micro level so that it can interact with income and the food security of smallholder farmers, especially about more than 12 million smallholder farmers are available in Ethiopia, where about more than 30% of them are food insecure. Of course, 67% of the steady area is food secure, but while 33% of the area is food insecure. So due to time, I didn't go detail sequentially. I'm sorry for that. thank you for attending. This is what I just highlight my research. If you have questions, and I can expand on the discussion. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. All right, Richard, unfortunately, due to time, I would rather ask you one question. I'm just wondering from Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. You concluded that this fortified bean variety has positive impact on their yield, but not income, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, apart from the addition or the incorporation of iron into this variety, is there any difference between this variety and any other improved variety? And then what is consumer preference, if you have any idea for this particular iron fortified bean?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think yes, in terms of consumer preferences, there are studies which have been done on consumer preferences of iron beans and also other biofortified crops. They prefer biofortified crops depending on the variety to other crop varieties. That depends entirely on the taste of the crop and the yield of the crop for production. But for consumption, it's basically on the taste, and taste is the major factor that determines the preference. And then your first question was how different is the biofortified iron beans in comparison with the other varieties. There are differences in terms of one, the glaring one is in terms of the iron content. The biofortified iron beans has about, depending on the varieties, between let's say 30% to 50% higher iron compared to other bean varieties. And in terms of the yield, that's also the study which has shown that it has a higher yield compared to other bean varieties. So maybe because I lumped other bean varieties, including the improved and the local together, that might also be another factor which might bring which might be a setback in the study. If we just compare improved varieties, within improved varieties, is there any yield differences between biofortified and improved varieties? There might be some kind of interesting things to see there, which probably I've not teased out into. So yeah, thank you. I think that's in short with how I can answer your question.
All right, thank you so much. And maybe I'll just give you a few seconds to ask your question.
No, I think my question was supposed to have gone for the mushroom study, but I think they handled most of the things that I wanted clarification on. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, I would have loved that we continue this discussion until tomorrow, but unfortunately, we don't have such luxury of time. So at this moment, I would like to bring this session to a close. And I would like to just once again, give the presenters an opportunity, just 1 second. Tell us just a key message that you want the audience to go home with. Just a key message. Maybe Daniel, it can be a phrase or just one word. It can be a phrase or one word.
So farming is mostly about plants and animals. And if farmers hear about fungi or mushrooms, they think it's pests. But mushrooms are actually the third pillar of a working agricultural ecosystem.
I see. So mushroom is the third pillar of working agroecological system.
Because it's researchers, because of climate change, irrigation will play a key role in providing food for the world. And we better make sure that it is nutritious by looking at irrigation differently as disaggregated and providing data that is intersectoral. Thank you.
All right. So irrigation as a climate adaptation strategy for nutrition security.
The key message is that tree crops does not increase household foods and nutrition security, at least for 50 to 75% of smallholder farmers. And so the key is to look at different type of farmers and tackle their food and nutrition security issues. Thank you.
Richard, just one word, a phrase for the audience to go home with.
Thank you. My key message for the audience is to implement biofortified programs. They need to package it with the nutritive value messages so that the farmers can be able to adopt and improve their yields. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Gary, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I hear you. My key message for the audience is, like other source of capital, natural capital, organizational capital, social capital is an important variable, and we cannot ignore. In smallholder farmers like in Ethiopia, it is better to consider in enhancing economic empowerment as well as income and food security enhancement programs. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And I also would like to conclude with this concluding remarks by Martha, your abstract, which I find it to be very interesting. It says that considering heterogeneity among smallholders and their production context is critical entry point for equitable food system transformation. So this is what I leave with you. Thank you so much for such a lively discussion, and I appreciate your participation in this session. So enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.